The disposable cameras weren't what caught my attention. It was the envelopes. I found them while helping clear out my aunt's garage last fall. There must have been 30 or 40 of them, stuffed inside a cardboard box. Most held photographs from my childhood, birthday parties, school plays, Christmas mornings. Then I found a stack from the Friday trips my father used to take me on. Those were my favorite memories growing up. Every Friday, he'd leave work early, pick me up, and drive somewhere new. A lake, a diner, a hiking trail. Sometimes, we'd end up in another county before sunset. Looking through the pictures felt like flipping through the happiest parts of my life. Until I noticed every roll of film had been developed by the same photo lab near our hometown. That didn't make sense. Some of those photos were taken more than 100 miles away. I brought the envelopes to my aunt, thinking she'd laugh at the mistake. Instead, she got quiet. After a while, she asked whether I remembered the drive home from those trips. I told her I usually fell asleep in the truck. She nodded and asked if I remembered ever arriving home. I sat there staring at her because I honestly didn't know. The question followed me home. I started pulling out old photo albums and calendars, trying to figure out why she'd reacted that way. That's when I noticed something else. There were hundreds of photographs. From those Fridays, not one showed me returning home. Not one showed my mother. Not one showed my older brother. The pictures always ended the same way, me smiling beside my father, somewhere far from town. The next image would be breakfast the following morning. It felt ridiculous to obsess over something that small, but once I noticed it, I couldn't stop. I called my aunt a few days later and asked what she'd meant. She avoided the question completely. Then she said something that made me even more uncomfortable. She told me my father never missed a Friday, not once. Rain, snow, sickness, overtime shifts, it didn't matter. He always took me somewhere. Before hanging up, she said she hoped I would leave it alone. That was the first moment I became certain there was something to find. The deeper I dug, the stranger those years looked. Old family calendars had strange marks on certain Fridays. My mother's journals mentioned doctor's appointments, but never said who they were for. One entry described my father coming home with a black eye. Another talked about replacing a bedroom door. There were dozens of little details that seemed meaningless by themselves. Together, they felt like fragments of a story nobody wanted to tell. I eventually requested copies of some childhood medical records. Most were normal. One wasn't. When I was 9, a doctor had documented recurring sleep disturbances and anxiety. The notes mentioned household stressors. The page after that was missing entirely. Not redacted. Missing. Around the same time, I found an old photograph I'd never seen before. My father was standing in our driveway, loading sleeping bags into his truck. In the background, barely visible through a window, my mother was holding someone back. The image was blurry, but I knew exactly who it was. My brother. I drove to my aunt's house the next morning and put the photograph in front of her. Her eyes stayed on it longer than I expected. Then she pushed it back across the table and said she didn't want to be the person who told me certain things. I asked whether the trips had something to do with my brother. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she asked what I actually remembered about him. The question caught me off guard because the answer was almost nothing. I could remember birthdays, Christmases, a handful of ordinary moments. My brother had lived in the same house for 16 years, yet somehow my memories of him felt thinner than memories of classmates I hadn't seen in decades. My aunt looked exhausted. Eventually, she said there were years when my parents barely slept. She said my father never took me on those trips because he wanted adventures. He took me because it was the only place he believed I was safe. Then she stopped talking. No matter what I asked after that, she wouldn't say another word. Most of the records led nowhere after that. A month later, I was sorting through boxes from my mother's old sewing room when I found a thick recipe binder held together with cracked rubber bands. Half the pages were handwritten recipes. The rest looked like things she'd tucked away simply because she didn't know where else to put them. Appliance warranties, insurance forms, receipts from stores that no longer existed. Buried between two stained recipe cards was a folded photocopy from a child psychologist's office. The first page was gone. Large sections had been blacked out with marker. Most of it was unreadable. One sentence wasn't. The evaluator recommended immediate separation from a younger family member due to escalating risk. I sat on the floor, staring at those words for a long time. Suddenly, everything fit. The locks on my bedroom door, my father carrying me inside. Every Friday, instead of waking me up, the way my mother always seemed tense whenever my brother entered a room. I realized something else too. The reason I couldn't remember arriving home wasn't because I always slept through the drive. My father never brought me back until long after my brother was asleep. By the time I woke up, I was already in bed. The trips had never been vacations. They had been waiting rooms. I visit my father's grave most Fridays now. I still tell him about work. I still tell him about my life. Some habits are hard to lose. For a long time, I thought the hardest part of this story was learning that my childhood wasn't what I believed. It isn't. The hardest part is realizing how much effort went into protecting a version of me that never knew there was anything to be protected from. I still don't know everything that happened in that house. Some records are gone. Some people refuse to talk. Maybe that's for the best. What stays with me isn't the missing information. It's a memory I used to love without understanding. Every Friday evening, my father would glance at me in the passenger seat to make sure I was asleep before turning the truck around and heading home. For most of my life, I thought that look was the expression of a happy father enjoying time with his daughter. Now I think it was something else entirely. I think it was the look of a man checking to make sure a rescue mission had worked one more time.